Coming to you from an undisclosed location deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I'm your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli, and this is Politics, Prophecy, and my Supernatural Report. Several years ago, Stephen Quayle released incredible information regarding a giant that was allegedly killed in Afghanistan or Iraq. The original story appeared in his book and, of course, later on Coast to Coast AM with host George Norrie. I found the story hard to believe, and frankly, who wouldn't? As a 12-foot, 1,100-pound giant living in the present day is something that is the stuff of tall tales. Or is it? Last year, Richard Shaw, the director and co-producer of the Watchers series, was being interviewed on the Dr. J radio show. After the show had ended, Richard continued with a conversation that had been initiated by a military guy who was called into the show. One thing led to another, and this caller, who shall remain anonymous, told Richard that he was in Afghanistan in 2002 and was one of the shooters who killed what has now become known as the Giant of Kandahar. Richard emailed me with the news that this man appeared to be truthful in relating his experience. The next day I called this person, whom from here on out I'll refer to as the shooter. I interviewed him over the phone and then an additional 3 times afterwards, listening to his story, seeing if he embellished it or changed important details. I then flew out to an undisclosed location and met the man face to face. I watched his body language very carefully, and I thought he was forthright and not telling us a canard. Still, Rick and I were hesitant about running with the story, as it was almost too incredible to believe. At this point, Providence provided yet another witness. This man, too, was ex-military and had served in Afghanistan. He was my driver at a conference that I was speaking at, and I struck up a conversation with him about his military background. I casually and sort of tongue-in-cheek asked him if he had ever heard of a giant being discovered while he was on duty. The man never missed a beat and replied, "Oh, you mean the Giant of Kandahar? He was shot by our guys a few years before I got there in a cave or a mouth of the cave or something like that."
We would come back to the base and we started hearing this rumor about a unit that killed what they started calling this really tall person. At first I didn't think anything of it. And come to find out that the person that they killed actually was 3 times the size of a man, had extra digits on their hand and digits on their feet, and had red hair. And a special unit had come in and wanted this target.
When I arrived at the venue where I was speaking, I phoned Richard and I told him we had yet another witness to the giant story. The initial story that was told to us was related verbatim by this man as fact. We then interviewed both of these men for our film, Watchers 10 DNA. There was also a dynamic of the story that I want to point out to you, and it's this. A while back, I interviewed Chief Joseph Riverwind right here on PPS Report. The chief and I spoke about what I have come to call the Nephilim Lance. This artifact was discovered in the backwoods of Michigan by an outdoorsman named Bob Shelley. Bob gave the original lance to the chief, and I'm holding a reproduction of it, a 1-to-1 reproduction of it, here as I speak. This weighs about 8.5 pounds. It's very heavy, and when you take this and lash it to a pole, it would be very difficult for a 6-foot man to wield. And yet, this is exactly what the shooter saw the giant wielding in Afghanistan. The reason I bring this up is because when I showed this lance to the shooter, he commented that this artifact was similar to what the Giant of Kandahar was wielding. There is another dynamic I want to discuss before we run the clip from Watchers 10 DNA, which, by the way, has become viral. The fact that this giant had 6 fingers and 6 toes, as well as flaming red hair. There was also a stench that was as powerful as a skunk, but according to the shooter, smelled more like a pile of rotting corpses. Here's the clip, and you can decide for yourself if giants are alive and well and living in the present day. You were in Afghanistan in 2002, and you were called into a very remote section of Afghanistan because a patrol had basically gone missing.
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
there's no
Well, it was
villages
just
around
nothing
for miles.
Right.
So it's very remote.
Yeah, very remote. So we flew in. To about 4 kilometers. We're hiking through the same area where they were supposed to make one of their checkpoints, one of their rally points. And before we'd left, there was all kinds of what happened with the ambush, but that was even odd because at point of ambush, you'd call for maybe close air support, something, okay? There was no calls made, just off the grid. So we're coming down a mountainside, and it was a nice path, a goat path. As we bent around this corner, you could see this opening of the cave. There's a cave as we're coming around. And then I see there's a lot of rocks, which is another oddity, and then bone matter. I'm not close enough to identify what kind of bones, but I did see something I knew was a piece of our communications equipment. So instantly, we're thinking ambush, maybe animal, could be anything. And there was enough room in front of this cave, but it had a sheer drop-off. But there was enough room that we actually got into a decent dispersal in case of ambush.
You see something coming out of the cave, and it's moving with a speed and agility that catches you off guard.
Everybody. And he comes out. It was a man at least 12 to 15 feet in height. This is a monster. Red beard, then his hair was longish past the shoulder, a scarlet red, and Dan runs at him and starts shooting, which broke all of us into the reality. Because it was
so
surreal.
Now your training is kicking in.
Oh yeah,
okay.
Muscle memory, complete muscle memory. While Dan is moving at him, another bro of mine's laying down fire, and I start firing. He skewers Dan. He's now got him on this pike. It went through him. And he's still got him, and he's coming after more. We all just clicked in. I don't know what it was, but I remember we're all like, shoot him in the face, shoot him in the face. And our weapons components were in force. We had 308s, and we had Barrett 50s. This is sounding longer than it took. We're talking 30 seconds. And he's taking multiple hits, and is still moving.
He talked about this giant being 1,100 pounds, anywhere from 10 to 15 feet long, and it was killed. It was apparently shot somewhere in a cave in Afghanistan, but before it was shot, it lunged at several of our troops, our soldiers. It may have even gorged somebody. It was just a bizarre story, and it just sounds like the Nephilim from the Bible, doesn't it?
That's why we're so fascinated by this. First off, can you imagine actually seeing something like this? A giant this big who's 12 feet to 15 feet tall. Take a good look at your ceiling. It's probably about 8 feet from the floor. Add another 4 feet on top of that to get 12 feet. Add 7 feet and you get a 15-footer. And as you go up, you've got to go out. That's how big this thing was. I can only imagine how the shooter and his battle buddies must have felt, and the fear that flashed through their minds, paralyzing them until their training kicked in and they brought the giant down. But not before the giant had impaled Dan on that very large pike.
And you have to assume that the giant is not alone, that the giant is not the only being living on this planet. There's got to be a whole school of them somewhere. Maybe he's got a female mate. Maybe he's got children. Who knows? Unfortunate that he had to attack our soldiers rather than be somewhat peaceful. But I guess that comes with the territory.
Dan was dead. Okay. And why is a good man, probably one of the best men I know, now dead. Before I'd left, they were already starting what they call a 9-line, which is a medevac request. They're sending out a medevac request, then all of a sudden it's not a medevac request.
All of a sudden we had a helicopter show up because, like I told you, it was a large precipice and a sheer drop. So the helicopter just came up from the drop. They had dropped netting, which is like cargo netting. It's like squares. We were told we had to bundle him up. And we get another bigger helicopter, but it's almost like a Jolly Green Giant used to look back in the day that could get, through this area. Because the mountains, you gotta remember, Chinooks could only go in certain places because they had enough lift. And so we got him on there. The thing was too big, we couldn't move it. It smelled worse than a skunk. A corpse that's been around for a while.
Really fell.
Oh, it was like a combination because of the, how do you put that, the persistence of a skunk smell. But once the helicopter came in, dropped its little hook, and off he goes. The communication was sent out that we had a very large possible human creature.
There you are in the hills of Afghanistan. How many troop members are you with?
We had 6 on my crew. When we say hills of Afghanistan, for us, we did not fly into the wilderness. We actually flew into a base. I guess this thing was transloaded out of the mountains by a CH-47. But I could see that it did have the 6 fingers. I remember taking my foot up and placing it up next to its foot, and it was extremely large. We estimated at about 12 feet, give or take. What I can tell you is the weight of the thing. Basically, it was approximately 1,500 pounds when it was getting on the aircraft. Now, if you take away the pallet weight and all the rigging that we had to hold this thing down, we figured it was around 1,100 pounds.
Of course we're upset. That's a given, okay? We lost a very good guy. But add to that, you're discussing something that even in our after action report, they're saying rewrite it. And we had to rewrite it the way they wanted.
How many fingers?
6 toes.
And 6 toes.
And the nails were weird because if you see somebody that ever has, I don't know what it's called, but it's
Like a fungus on
the nails, how they get pointy and they're like gnarly, that's what they look like.
As we showed you in the clip, the radio operator checked in and gave the report, and the unit was told to stand by as Central Command was about to dispatch 2 helicopters to them. They were told that the Giant would be loaded on one of the choppers and then they would follow in the other chopper for debriefing. The shooter told us that when the chopper landed, they loaded the Giant into a very large cargo net. The first chopper towing a Giant left, and then they boarded the second helicopter and followed. When they returned to their base in the Kandahar province in Afghanistan, they were debriefed and told to keep all of this under wraps. They were forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which essentially would prohibit them from talking about this to anyone. It is with great reluctance on the shooter's part that he has come forward. He believes that people have the right to know what is going on this planet, that the supernatural is real, and that the startling and unsettling fact that a remnant of a legendary Nephilim are still on the earth may be true. While the shooter's story is certainly fantastic, it does corroborate Stephen Quayle's account that he published years before. And people have a right to know about this stuff. I mean, if there are 15-footers or 18-footers roaming the planet, and our military has brought them down. I mean, we have a right as American citizens. I mean, this isn't classified military stuff. This is something that we need to know, and it points back to the biblical prophetic narrative. What are your thoughts on that?
I think here's my personal opinion. My personal opinion is if it points that the Bible's accurate, they don't want it. If it goes against Darwinian evolution, it's not to be spoken of.
So you're out in the boonies running around looking for high-value targets?
Correct.
Okay.
And we're doing those operations, and as we're getting into firefights, we're getting into different scrimmages, you want to put it that way, we would come back to the base and we started hearing this rumor about a unit that killed this, what they started calling this really tall person. At first I didn't think anything of it, and then come to find out that the person that they killed actually was 3 times the size of a man, had extra digits on their hand and digits on their feet, and had red hair, and a special unit had come in and wanted this target. Well, we'd heard that they had killed this thing inside a cave or the mouth of a cave. And it was common knowledge among the military to hear this.
And when you say common knowledge, what do you mean? I mean, how does that work?
Years later, to come to find out, when I had returned from Afghanistan and had met other military members that had not been there in the operations with me, if you would bring up the Giant of Kandahar, they knew about it. When you first hear it, you're thinking like, this has got to be a joke. This has got to be a hoax. And then after things go down a certain way and you keep hearing it, you start to realize it's not a joke. They kept telling us to keep our weapons high, which means normally it's two to the chest, one to the head, but they kept telling us to put it towards a man's head and put it higher. So we would question, why do they want us to shoot higher than a man's head?
That's bizarre.
It is.
Our contact said 2002 is when they shot this 15-footer or taller, and you're now in this, you know, in the service around 2005. This word has gotten out, and what I find interesting here too is that if you're going to create a hoax, I get that, but you got details: 6 fingers, red hair, double rows of teeth, 6 digits on the toes, and of course that brings it right back into what we hear about in the biblical prophetic narrative, specifically the Nephilim. Your thoughts?
I agree. I will tell you that when I was doing my time in the service, and the stuff I saw, some of it I couldn't explain, like lights in the sky during firefights, like orbs, or lights that would be the size of a softball that looked that size looking up in the sky but making weird noises. And even going to Iraq myself and being near Haditha Dam and seeing the prisoners underneath the dam, and the prisoners would scream and there would be this awful feeling underneath the dam, and then later finding out in the Bible that angels locked underneath there, where it talks about.
And this Haditha Dam is the Euphrates.
Is Euphrates,
and there's
correct.
an angel supposedly locked underneath the Euphrates,
Correct.
which is released in the book of Revelation.
Correct.
That's bizarre. So you're actually at this site, and soldiers are being locked, imprisoned underneath the Haditha Dam.
Correct.
And they're freaking out.
They were freaking out. They said they could feel it. In fact, the people who would guard them they would draw straws to see who would actually take them.
No one wanted to go down.
Nobody wants to go down. Going back to Afghanistan, we would hear these things. We would hear the locals talk about rumors of these giants.
What would the locals say? How would they talk about it?
They say that they lived in the caves and they would eat people, and
They were cannibals.
they were cannibals. And we, at the time, chalked it up to our United States as Bigfoot.
So why this is all hearsay? We don't have photographs, but we do have 2 witnesses. There's no corroboration between the 2, and Steve Quayle's witness makes 3 people, all who have come on the record, stating that the Giant of Kandahar was in fact real. The second witness had no hint of the interview that we did with the shooter, and so he had no dog in the hunt, as it were, in regard to vetting the story. There's another point to the story that I find really interesting, and this has to do with the second witness. While this man was in training, they were taught how to fight in a cave. Part of their training was cave fighting. They were informed that the Afghan soldiers holed up in caves, and that once they were deployed, they might find themselves fighting in caves. You may remember the events of 9/11. We were given graphic illustrations of Osama bin Laden's cave complex. It was on the cover of Time magazine. What was interesting about this part of the story was this particular soldier who came on the record informed us that during the training, the men were told to aim high. In other words, soldiers are taught to aim for the chest and then shoot for the head with the second shot. In other words, soldiers are taught to aim for the chest with the first 2 shots and then a kill shot to the head, which would be standard military procedure in a firefight. There was something else. Why would the training change the basic military precept by instructing the men to aim high? We found that incredibly interesting. The second soldier told us that he didn't understand this at the time, but later, once deployed to the Kandahar province in Afghanistan and hearing about the giant, he put 2 and 2 together and figured out that the training was because the military may have believed there was more than one of these guys running around. We're offering this groundbreaking DVD, Watchers 10 DNA, and my new book, Nephilim Hybrids, for only $34.99. If you were to buy both of these items separately, the cost would be $40. But as a bonus, we'll send you a 1-year free subscription to our monthly PPS Report e-news magazine. It comes as a PDF file in your email box and is packed with riveting and stimulating articles and commentary. You get it all for only $34.99. Watchers 10 DNA plus my new book, Nephilim Hybrids, which has some chapters and new information that the DVD doesn't delve into. Please go to www.ppsreport.com and pick up your copies of these groundbreaking works today. That's ppsreport.com.
So what is that? And they told me that's the fairy. We've talked to various people about, John in Revelation describing locusts that have wings. And I have pictures of creatures that look exactly like that. And if you look back to John's time during Revelation with his limited use of language, it's very uncanny that that's, to me, what he's describing. And these creatures are here now.
Mexico City. Traffic is heavy, and the idea of drug cartels is in the back of everybody's mind. There's extra security in all the expensive hotels in the area. And yet life goes on. Jaime Maussan is the host of the longest-running and most popular UFO television show in the world. He has millions of viewers, and people everywhere send him their videos. Sometimes that includes physical objects like spheres from space, or weird creatures. He records programs here, but we never expected to see something as unexplainable as what Jaime showed us this time. We were held to a promise that we wouldn't show this discovery until he granted us permission. To honor that agreement, we've sat on that finding for over 2 years. Now we're allowed to finally release it.
Ricardo, these creatures are very, very strange. They're anomalous. I don't know really what I'm looking at, but you have done DNA testing on this creature and this creature. Tell us what you found.
This DNA sequence was made from 5 different molecular biology laboratories in several parts of the world. And the common results has the DNA is very similar to DNA from humans in 98.5% of similitude. It's very strange.
The Metepec creature is a hybrid. The other creature that I show you is a hybrid, and that's something very important because I believe they are experiments. What kind of experiments? Why? I don't know. But we have a physical body, and we can analyze that physical body and prove that something, an intelligence is behind these experiments.
Do you think the phenomena is good or bad or both? You think it's a little mixture of both, or is it all good or all evil? What do you think?
I don't think it's good or evil. I think they have their own interest. I think they are not interfering with us, at least not massive. They are probably taking some people, some analyzing. I think they are doing their own experiments for their own agenda.
The legs, the feet.
Okay.
But this creature have another, is the wings. We have an X-ray of this creature.
You have an X-ray of it?
Yes, we have an X-ray.
What did the X-ray show?
And we can see the structure of the bones related with the structure.
So this is not a hoax?
No.
It is not a hoax?
Not a hoax.
Because an X-ray would show that it was a puppet or a mold?
No, this is a model. And we have a sample of tissues of this creature, and we sent to DNA molecular laboratory. But when the laboratory tried to sequencing this DNA, not found a concordance with DNA from the mammals or other creatures.
So both the mitochondrial DNA and the nuclear DNA No matches at all?
No match with
No
any
matches.
creature
Wow.
related with the mammoth.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you so much for coming on the camera. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Ricardo was kind enough to take some DNA samples for us, which were put into a sterile container. These samples would have been tested in the USA at a DNA lab, but they were confiscated by the TSA upon entering America and destroyed. This was after confirming permissions by phone at the airport with Jaime Maussan. Since the TSA confiscated samples given to watchers of the ferry 3 years ago, we were unable to test it until recently. Jaime had Ricardo take new samples. They were flown in from Mexico in 2016 and arrived safely this time. The new samples were tested by 2 DNA labs. However, since the ferry had been immersed in formaldehyde for several years, none of the labs were able to derive any DNA from it. Since there are hoaxes of fairies on the internet that we knew of, we needed to make sure that this creature was real. We needed to see the X-rays. Perhaps that would give us some fresh clues. At a rare dinner in Beverly Hills with Jaime, he told us the whole story of how he got the ferry.
Is there any possibility in your mind that it might be a hoax?
No. There is no possibility because the man who found it is a 13-year-old who didn't know what it was, who didn't ask anything for it, and didn't have any kind of knowledge about extraterrestrials, fairies, or anything else.
Nothing like that.
He just saw an opportunity. He wanted to know at the beginning what it was, and then afterwards, probably to get 1 penny or 2. But nothing more than that. I mean, to consider that this young kid would have the knowledge to do something scientific like this,
Sophisticated.
to create something like this, is absolutely impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I would change my name if he did something else.
Right. Jaime, where did this 13-year-old boy, where did he find this creature?
He found it on the side of the highway. He was traveling from Guadalajara to Mexico. He stopped very near to the exit to Morelia, but on the highway. He was doing his physical necessities on the side of the highway, and he saw it. And he told me that it was clear that was very recently dead. I mean, it didn't have passed more time, a lot of time between that moment and the time of the death of this creature. He thought probably a few minutes before he found it.